Hi, this is Heather Widener for the 2015 ICE Resin design team. Today I'm going to show you how to make a really cool summer blockbuster movie themed pendant using very few components to achieve a really fun 3D effect inside the bezel. It doesn't actually use that many materials, and even though there are numerous layers, it's not a complicated layering project. For this project, we're going to use ICE resin with mixing cups and stir sticks, some Art Mechanic paper sealer, some clear packing tape, a disposable brush, an Art Mechanic mixed metal bezel, some small scissors, and then you'll need artwork for inside your bezel, and then the artwork for the other component pieces. The theme for my pendant is the 2015 remake of The Man from U.N.C.L.E, and my whole pendant is built around this laser woodcut female figure that I had in my inventory who's wearing 60s attire. Because she's wearing a yellow dress, that kind of dictated the color palette I wanted to use for the rest of the components in my pendant. The male figures are just printed on regular recycled copier paper and then cut out. I've scaled them into the photo editing software to fit in the pendant in the sizing that I want to work with my layers, and then the base of my pendant is simply an image of Florence that I also tweaked in photo editing software to fit the bezel and also to go along with the palette that I chose, which was largely blue and yellow based. The woodcut was created by Scott Lyon of the Pork Chop Show. You can find him online. The first thing we're going to do for the bezel is prep our component parts. And I'm going to put a thin layer of paper sealer on my laser woodcut piece just to ensure that no resin absorbs into that top paper layer when I put it into the bezel, because I don't want the figure to darken at all. In this particular project, for the paper components of the bezel, I decided to use clear packing tape to seal the front and the backs of the Florence image, as well as the two male figures. Particularly with the figures, because they're so small, it's actually easier to use the tape than to try to paint on a thin layer of the paper sealer. Once you have the tape on, secured front and back, and kind of burnished well and with no gaps and air holes, you're just going to trim it carefully around the edge, ensuring that the paper is securely sealed so that it will not absorb resin and that it will still fit in the bezel. I've mixed up a small batch of the ICE resin according to the package instructions, and now I'm going to put a very thin layer on top of my Florence image that's going to secure the image in the bezel and also act as the adhesive for the wood figure layer. You'll notice that I'm taking a lot of care to make sure that I am getting the resin all the way into the edges and the corners of the bezel before I even bother with putting anywhere else in the bezel. I want to make sure I have a very good seal in those corners and edges and not a bunch of air bubbles. Once I've finished applying that thin layer of resin into the bezel, I can place the wood figure. Now, the wood figure has dimension already. The wood is about 1/8 of an inch thick, and so I don't need to build a thicker layer of resin to get dimension for that layer. The dimension comes from the object itself. So that's why I just want the thin layer and to adhere the figure, and also because I don't want the figure to float. I don't want to have to worry about it moving around. I just want to put it in there and let gravity work with the resin to set the piece up. Once that first layer of resin has set up to the tacky stage, I'm going to apply an additional layer of resin. This is the layer onto which I'm going to affix the first male figure. Now, I do not want to fill the bezel so high that this resin layer that I'm working on right now goes all the way to the surface of the wood figure. I just want to build a layer that's about half as deep as the wood figure, because that's how we're going to get depth with all these layers. So I'm just going to fill that to about half as high as the wood figure, and then I'm going to let that set up until it's to the tacky stage, and then I'm going to affix my first male figure. Because I only let the layer of resin set up to the tacky stage, I don't actually need to make a new batch to affix the first male figure. I can use the tackiness to hold him, and I just use a skewer or the end of my disposable brush to make sure there are no air bubbles underneath. Now I'm ready to apply the next layer of resin to the bezel, and this is the layer that is going to be as high as the surface of the wood figure. Basically, I'm going to fill the bezel as high as the wood figure and then just have enough resin to put over top of the wood figure. I've let that most recent layer go to the tacky stage, and now I'm ready to apply the second male figure. I'm going to put a thin layer of ice resin on the back of the figure just to discourage air bubbles from forming when I place the figure into the bezel. After I place the third figure into the bezel, I'm just going to use the end of my disposable brush to gently press the figure into the tacky layer of resin, and also to encourage any gas bubbles or air bubbles to come out from behind the figure. Once I've got the third figure in, I can apply as few or as many additional layers of ice resin as I desire to achieve the level of dome that I want. I personally like a very high dome, and so I applied several additional layers to get the dome effect that I wanted. I hope you enjoyed this project today. For more information on ice resin, including frequently asked questions and tutorials, go to iceresin.com. For more information on my work, you can find me at gemfabulous.com and huebijou.com.